All right, well, so far we've been using types that have been given to us already by Swift. For example, ints, bools, strings, etc. But now the fun really begins because we get to make our own types. And the first way of doing this, is probably the most basic way, is using enums. Enum stands for enumeration, which is a fancy term for set in math. And they're just a way for you to create a simple type that has non-numeric values of your own choosing. Okay? So an example of this, let's say you were writing a piece of code that dealt with our solar system, and you wanted some data type that represented the planets. Okay? Now, how would you do this? Let's say you don't know about enums yet, because we don't. Instead, what could we do even without using enums to implement this? Well, one way is to just use strings. And so if you just use strings, you could say, create variables that have string values that you know represent the planet names. For instance, if you had var planet equals Earth, and then later on in the code you might do a switch statement on that planet, and then you can just compare against each of the planets. So, in this case, you would need to add a default because you need to make sure you cover all of the cases. And so, you can see that if planet equals the value Earth, it's going to go down to this case in the switch statement and print out just right because the temperature is just right. And certainly if you change this to Mercury, you'd be considered very hot, and so forth. And this certainly works, and you could do this, and you can imagine in the rest of your code you'd be using these string values to represent the planets. What's wrong with this? Well, for one thing, it's very easy to mistype these values. Mercury, Venus, Earth. If you forget the capitalization or whatnot, you can cause bugs in your code very easily because the compiler can't help you check these string values. Okay? So anytime you mistype the planet names, you're on your own. And it can make for a lot of really annoying bugs that are pesky to track down. That's probably the biggest reason that this solution is subpar. Some other aspects are doing these string comparisons is not a very speed efficient way of doing things. That's probably less of a consideration. Also, if you wanted to take this variable and then use it as an index into an array, that would be very valuable. Okay, like you had another variable of, say, the distances from the sun. I'm just going to make up some numbers here. Don't worry about what they really mean. Something like this. Okay, these are obviously not correct values. But let's just say you have these distances from the sun. Then, excuse me. Need these brackets. Then there's actually no way for you to index this using this variable planet, right? If you do something like this, lots of syntax error because these indexes to these arrays must be integers, okay? So that's why these are some of the downsides of using strings this way. Well, what if you used ints instead, okay? Well, in that case, instead of what you have above, you'd have something more like var planet equals 0, say. And in our own comments, we could say something like Mercury equals 0, Venus equals 1, Earth equals 2, Mars equals 3, and so on. So in your code, if you say var planet equals 0, you know that you're referring to Mercury, all right? So then, switch statement would look more like this. Okay. Let's just say planet 2, we don't want to conflict with the one that's above it. It's already declared. So now this works very similarly, except you're using int values instead of string values. So the pros of this is that, well, it's hard to mistype these integer values for one thing. So that's probably a good thing, although you still might mess up. And also, now you can index into your array. So distance from sun planet 2 will actually give you the distance from the sun for planet 0, which is Mercury. And similarly, if you go to 3, that's Mars. It gives you the distance that we have down for it. So integers are good for that reason. Well, what's the downside of using integers? Well, it's really hard to read in your code, right? Like, imagine you had these kinds of switch statements all throughout your code, multiple times. You really want to be picking through these integer IDs. That seems like a recipe for disaster as well, in its own way. But you get some more functionality than you do with a string case. So what's a third possible way? Something that's a little better than both ints and strings is to just take the ideas from both and combine them. So the idea is now we can just say create a bunch of constants and call them something descriptive. So let planet Mercury equals 0. Let planet Venus equals 1. Let planet Earth equals 2. And so now this way it's a lot cleaner, because now if you have, say, planet 3 equals planet Earth, and then change our switch statement, now we're looking at some different cases, right? Because we are not using integers or strings as the IDs themselves, but rather these constants. And there you have it. So our third method is to use these constants. And this is probably the best of both worlds, because you are using descriptive labels in your code, but your compiler can help tell you if you do something wrong, if you mistype something. So if you left out the T there, see, now your compiler will complain because it is not a literal value, but rather a constant value. And so, you get readability and you get compiler checking of spelling. And you also can still index into arrays, because those constants are actually integer values under the hood. Okay.